Also tonight, the Department of Children and Families calls it a major public health problem: child abuse and neglect. Now they're releasing new guidelines for doctors to spot it. NBC Connecticut troubleshooter Jeff Stoecker sat down with DCF Commissioner Joette Katz in an interview you'll see first on NBC Connecticut. Jeff.
Well, Jerry, these guidelines mean changes for any parent taking their child to the clinic or emergency room for that cut, that bruise, that break, and all of it stems from a horrific case of abuse that ended in the death of a little girl. Athena Angeles was just 3 years old when she died in November of last year. Police say she died from repeated abuse at the hands of her mother's boyfriend, Freddie Alexander Chingo-Reese. According to a coroner's report, her injuries were from head to toe, bruises and cuts on the outside, lacerations to her liver, and broken ribs on the inside. Her death sparked 6 months of meetings convened by DCF Joette Katz. She says Athena didn't have to die.
If she'd been examined and her clothing been removed, they would have seen those bruises on that poor baby's body, and she'd be alive today.
Katz brought together a team of doctors and child advocates, and this week that group is issuing new guidelines for all doctors across the state on how to deal with potential cases of abuse. There are two parts. The first step: any child under the age of 6 that shows up with an injury based on some sort of physical impact needs to be completely examined to look for any other signs of abuse. The second part is requesting that hospitals and clinics check their own records for the medical history of that child.
But if you look at the file and you realize, wait a minute, this is the third random accident in the last month, you look at that child, you look at that case a little bit differently.
Athena's mother, Rosa Diaz-Mendez, was arrested and charged with manslaughter on Tuesday. In her arrest warrant, we found layers of agencies and doctors that came into contact with Athena in the 3 months before she died. All of them documented cuts and bruises that, time after time, were explained away by Athena's mother as accidents. Athena attended the Early Childhood Development Program in the Windham School District from September of 2011 until her death. Police noted at least 6 injuries were seen by staff, perhaps the worst on October 18th, when one staff member observed that both of Athena's eyes were black, barely able to open them because her face was so swollen. Anna Ortiz is superintendent of Windham Public Schools.
For DCF in the state of Connecticut, it's been like the situation that had to happen for them to strengthen their reporting processes so that everyone avoids this from happening again.
But this shouldn't have happened in the first place. This didn't have to happen.
Yeah, you're telling me we know that. We agree with you.
Program Director Mary Jane Crotty wouldn't comment on specific dates or instances in Athena's file because of confidentiality rules. She says she's confident her staff followed procedure, but she says the series of doctors and agencies meant to protect Athena weren't talking to each other.
We all have to kind of mesh together. So if there was some kind of failing, it might have been how all those systems work together, not that one person didn't do something.
Athena was seen at the Generations Family Health Center on at least 4 occasions where police documents show cuts and bruises were treated by doctors. NBC Connecticut reached out to Generations. So far, they have not responded to our request for an interview. Records also show that Athena was taken by her mother to Windham Hospital on November 22nd, the night before she died, for a cut on her head. She was sent home with staples to close it, the result of, as her mother explained, another accident. The following day, police say Freddie Reese delivered the final and fatal blows to Athena. She was rushed to Windham Hospital for the last time. Statement from Windham Hospital, a spokesperson tells NBC Connecticut, "Clearly, we are troubled by this tragic incident, which has motivated us to improve and develop a better process to identify and protect children who are at risk of abuse." Which brings us back to these new regulations. Commissioner Katz is implementing training for doctors across the state to help them better identify abuse in the wake of a system that didn't for Athena. Somehow all these layers failed her.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we all owe this child an apology. Everybody.
These changes will affect any parent bringing their child under the age of 6 to the doctor with injuries that come from some sort of physical impact. So even if these are truly accidents, like falling off of a bike, these guidelines are asking doctors to conduct that full, thorough exam and to look at the child's history. And Commissioner Katz wants parents to understand this is not meant to be insulting to good parents, but to prevent cases like Athena's and her mother. Mother's boyfriend right now. Their cases are working their way through the courts.
Well, you look into her eyes in that picture and you want to make sure there are no more kids like Athena.
Yeah.
That's right. Breaks your heart.
Yeah, terribly sad.
Jeff, thanks.
If you have a story for the troubleshooters, email news@nbcconnecticut.com or call 1-800-523-9848.
Abel Sanchez says he doesn't feel safe in this New Haven neighborhood. That fear doesn't come from criminals roaming the streets, but from those who are supposed to protect them. Before, I wasn't afraid of the police. Now, I'm scared of them. Before, I used to talk to them and ask them for help or say something is going on. But now I have fear. Sanchez took us to where it all happened 4 years ago. It was here where he says he was beaten to the ground, kicked and punched repeatedly, hit with pepper spray, and ridiculed by New Haven police officer Dennis O'Connell. And these hospital pictures show what he looked like after. Speaking through an interpreter, Sanchez describes his injuries.
He broke his... He can't even tell you how many times it was the whole thing because he was unconscious. He broke his nose, his neck, his face, all over the place. The ribs, his ribs, and everything.
Sanchez says it all began when his brother-in-law told him he had been pulled over by police and had to leave his car behind. Sanchez went back to the car to turn the lights off, and that's when he says the alleged incident took place. The New Haven Police Department launched an internal affairs investigation after Sanchez filed a complaint. Transcripts of interviews show Officer O'Connell said Sanchez was yelling and swinging his arms, refusing to be handcuffed during the incident. The department exonerated O'Connell of any wrongdoing in January of 2011. 7 months later, the city paid Sanchez a $50,000 settlement. NBC Connecticut looked into Officer O'Connell's history with the department and found this wasn't the first time he's been accused of using excessive force.
I believe I'm in danger. I believe even my life is in danger.
Alvaro Garzon says he was tased over and over by O'Connell outside his house after a domestic dispute with his wife in July of 2010. Tasers keep a record of when they are deployed, and according to the log, O'Connell fired his taser on Garzon 5 times in less than 3 minutes. These pictures show some of the marks that were left behind, and Garzon says he was already in handcuffs when he was tased. Garzon's complaint to police sparked another investigation, which was closed in April of 2011. Department records show Garzon filed the initial complaint, but when they tried to contact him about the investigation, Garzon couldn't be reached, and they didn't hear from him again. Garzon says that isn't true, and he's suing the city, accusing O'Connell of brutality. Police records show Garzon has been arrested before for domestic violence, and according to investigation transcripts, another officer reported seeing Garzon kick and knee O'Connell in the incident when he says he was tased and beaten. Digging into police records, we discovered O'Connell has been the subject of at least 9 internal affairs investigations over the course of 6 years in which people claim they were brutalized.
On the 3rd one, I'd start being a little worried. On the 8th one, you ought to be doing something.
Dr. Dennis Kenny is a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. He specializes in community policing, working with departments here in the U.S., as well as forces in Colombia and Yemen. We asked him to take a look at the internal affairs reviews of Officer O'Connell.
The first couple of times you do internal affairs and you assume it's, if he's assigned in a difficult neighborhood or something such as that, it can be explained away. But as the consistency begins to mount, it just suggests to you that there's a problem.
While 8 of the 9 internal affairs investigations ended in O'Connell being exonerated, Kenny says that doesn't necessarily mean nothing happened. He says these investigations often end in the accuser's word against that of the officer, where no wrongdoing can be proved or disproved, or, as Internal Affairs puts it, exonerated. That's why Kenny says after the first few incidents, he would expect supervisors to take a closer look.
One of the things that would concern me right away is the allegations seem to be fairly consistent. Similar behavior running across the different cases.
None of the internal affairs investigations resulted in disciplinary action for O'Connell, and in only one case, he was found in violation of department procedure, and it wasn't for using excessive force. In fact, the only disciplinary action taken against O'Connell that we were able to find in this stack of documents from his file came as a result of crashing his cruiser 6 times over the course of 4 years, and for that, he was reprimanded and suspended for 1 day. We made several requests to sit down for an interview with Chief Dean Esserman. We wanted to ask him about Officer O'Connell and about how the department handles these kinds of allegations. We also asked to talk with Officer O'Connell himself. So far, all of our requests have been denied. Of the 9 internal affairs investigations, 8 of the complaints were filed by Latinos, prompting one community group to put up these wanted posters with pictures of Officer O'Connell warning the community he polices that he is a threat. We found Officer O'Connell on patrol as of this May as part of Chief Esserman's new community policing initiative to get more boots on the streets. The city of New Haven just gave the department the go-ahead to add nearly 80 additional officers to its ranks and is applying for grants to hire even more. But Dennis Kenny says when members of the community see police as a threat,
citizens will be reluctant to make complaints then. Obviously what that means then is that you've got a wedge being driven in the community, and if the police in the community can't relate, then the police can't be effective.
One lawsuit involving Officer O'Connell has cost the city and taxpayers $50,000, with a second still unresolved. For Abel Sanchez, coming forward also comes at a cost. He's in this country illegally, yet he decided to risk deportation to speak out. Sanchez says it's not just him, but many in his community who live in fear of Dennis O'Connell. They say they are afraid. What they did to you, they can do to someone else. With the NBC Connecticut Troubleshooters, I'm Jeff Stoecker.
NBC Connecticut Troubleshooters investigation. A couple came to us for help after their adoption plans could not have gone more wrong.
After spending thousands of dollars, their adoption agency told them they were shutting down. Jeff Stoecker on the case. Jeff.
Well, Jerry, Keisha, this Texas adoption agency was in operation for nearly 3 decades. They boast more than 5,000 successful adoptions all over the world. Couples had every reason to trust them, but in early April, they closed their doors, leaving a Connecticut family out of more than $35,000 and without hope. Sweaters, dresses, pink polka dots all hang in a bedroom closet at Tom and Carrie Craft's Farmington home. They were supposed to be worn by their adopted baby girl. Since the Crafts' decision to use a Texas agency to make that dream happen,
it's been a roller coaster. I mean, I can't even say it's been a roller coaster. It's just been a downhill spiral.
The Crafts used a Texas adoption agency because laws allow for termination of the rights of the birth parents more quickly than in Connecticut. The process started with a home study conducted by a Connecticut social services agency. That information was submitted to Adoption Services Associates out of San Antonio, Texas. After paying the agency's upfront fee of $13,400, the Crafts say the trial was shown to pregnant women in Texas looking to give up their baby. In February, they were picked.
She liked that we were animal people. I think the fact that there would be a sibling there, I think that was something that connected for her.
Then came the second fee, more than $21,000. The Crafts thought everything was going according to plan. That is until March 10th. That's when they say the birth mother missed a regularly scheduled phone call. It was the first of many. The Crafts called their caseworker with ASA, asking what happened. What they say they got was a series of inconsistent stories and excuses.
It just seemed like they were stringing us along almost.
The Crafts thought the birth mother had changed her mind, and their caseworker wasn't calling them back. No contact until April 5th, when they received an email from the husband of ASA's executive director, Linda Zuflacht. It said she was gravely ill and that the agency was closing its doors.
And the first thing through my mind was, you know, we're out.
It wasn't just them. Dozens of families in the U.S. and Europe in the middle of the adoption process got that same email, left hanging. Thousands of dollars gone. A few days later, the Crafts received this handwritten note from their caseworker at ASA saying, quote, "The unthinkable is happening. The agency is failing and probably closing as we speak. I was not asked to inform you, but I feel personally full of pain and shame." Last week, ASA declared bankruptcy. dashing hopes for the Crafts that they would get their money back. In that bankruptcy filing, hundreds of families are listed as creditors. NBC Connecticut tried to contact the agency several times with no success. We also reached out to dozens of Connecticut families on that list. Some of them told us their adoptions were completed years ago, and they were happy with ASA. Others had a different story.
Cheats, crooks, liars.
That's how Elise Goldshine describes ASA. She and her husband started working with them back in 2009, ready to add a second child to their family. They say they paid the $13,000 upfront fee, and on their application, they indicated they did not want a birth mother who was drug addicted. Elise says she and her husband were assured that babies were available, but the first calls that came in were about a drug-addicted birth mother. And then
we received more calls asking us about more drug-addicted mothers.
After the Goldshines say they told their ASA caseworker several times they did not want a birth mother testing positive for drug use, they were told the wait would be long and their expectations were unrealistic. They gave up on the agency and the $13,000.
They lied, but there's really no way to prove that they were lying to us. And all there was that signed contract and all of our money.
The San Antonio Police Department and the Texas Attorney General's office tell NBC Connecticut they are investigating ASA and its executive director, Linda Zuflacht. A representative with the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services tells NBC Connecticut that they have minimal oversight when it comes to private agencies like ASA. One requirement, however, is that they fulfill an annual financial report. In ASA's last filing with the state submitted in April of 2011, the agency reported income of just over $681,000 and expenses of more than $706,000. That's $25,000 in the red. Digging a little deeper, we looked into the office property itself. ASA reports paying more than $68,000 a year in rent for a building that, according to county tax records, is owned by Linda Zuflacht, trustee. The same Linda Zuflacht that is the executive director of the agency. It's unclear what, if any, assets remain and if these families will get any of their money back. Here in Connecticut, the Crafts aren't sure what's next. What they have is a baby's room upstairs, a room they rarely enter after a process that has been one door after another closed.
These are supposed to be nonprofit agencies who make hundreds of thousands of dollars in executive salaries and legal fees. And who's policing this? Who's who's watching out for us?
So in working on this story, we spoke with a couple of adoption experts. They tell us prospective parents should contact an agency's licensing board in their state, check with the Better Business Bureau, and talk to others who have used the agency before. But in this case, ASA had a strong history, and experts tell us no one saw this coming. And Jerry and Keisha, I've actually spoken with several agencies, placement agencies in the state of Connecticut, and they tell me this is not the only family that's been affected by this.
It's got to be such a difficult situation for those families. What can the Crafts do now?
Well, in Texas, 2 other adoption agencies have stepped forward, and they said that they would actually come out and help these families. But that is not there's a cost associated with this. It could be $12,000 to $20,000 more they'd have to shell out, and these are people that have already lost is $20,000, $30,000, and in their case, $35,000 already gone.
Jeff, thank you.
Yeah.
And if you have a story for the troubleshooters, call us 1-800-523-9848 or send an email to news@nbcconnecticut.com.